Hello, thank you for joining our webinar today. We're going to be speaking about this topic of improving your data security with AI-powered classification tools. Data classification specifically, is an extremely important part of how to protect one of your most valuable assets, the data that you have in your organization. And today we're going to be speaking about some really innovative things that are going on with classification. Particularly this area of leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to increase accuracy and to make a much better experience in terms of your data classification. My name is Kevin Oliveira. I'm a senior product marketing manager with Forcepoint. Prior to working at Forcepoint, I worked at both IBM and Dell as product marketing managers at both those organizations as well, with hardware and software and different security. Today we have joining us Mark Brosnan and Jaimen Hoopes. They'll be introducing themselves. Jaimen, could you maybe give us some introduction to yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. My name is Jaimen Hoopes. I'm Vice President of Product Management at Forcepoint, responsible for the data security products. I've been in cybersecurity for about 19 years, mostly in the DLP and data analytics portions of cyber, and very happy to be here today.
Great, thanks, Jaimen. And Mark?
Hi, my name is Mark Brosnan, and I'm the CEO of Getvisibility. We've been building a very innovative and powerful AI-based platform for classification for the last while, and we're very happy to be partnering with Forcepoint.
Great. Thank you. This should be a great discussion between the two of you guys in terms of classification and security. Starting off, Jaimen's going to give us an introduction just on data security in general and what Forcepoint's perspective is on data security.
Yeah, so as I talk to customers who are building really strong data security programs, these are kind of the four main areas and order of operation for understanding data, classifying data, and eventually leading to that data protection. But the first step that most customers take is discovering their data. There's a lot of data out there, and it's growing every single day. What most customers find is they're surprised about where their data is and who has access to that data. And that upfront discovery is very eye-opening and gives them that necessary visibility to understand the risk they have around that data. Next is, in the order of operation, is classifying that data. It's important from a protection standpoint, not only to understand where your data is, but understand the sensitivity and importance of that data. Is it data that you don't mind leaving the organization or that has to leave just so your organization can operate? Or is it intellectual property that you have to really safeguard and keep in-house? Understanding that and then taking the next step of classifying it in such a way allows you to monitor and then protect that data from leaving the organization if it should not be leaving. So that's, if you build the slide, Kevin, is where the data loss prevention can come in, is the data's classified and that protection piece, reading those labels, you can create those DLP policies to take action on the classification that you have done through that discovery process. On top of that, what Forcepoint has uniquely done is created a risk adaptive protection on top of the data loss prevention suite. What that means is we can also watch a user's behavior at the endpoint and see if they're doing anything suspicious. We have patented what we coin as indicators of behavior. So if a user is doing things like clearing system caches, modifying registry keys, clearing event logs, things that are just abnormal, that will start to affect a user's risk score. And if a user becomes more risky, their DLP policies can become dynamically and automatically more restrictive. So if somebody does something suspicious, their risk score goes up, and they're able to do less with data, move data in more restrictive manners.
That's great. I'm just one comment on the risk adaptive protection. We do have several videos on that as well. And I really encourage you watching this webinar to check those videos out on YouTube or on our website and get more information on how that works.
Yeah, when I talk to customers about that piece of it, it's really beneficial, because doing that work manually and first of all, just identifying who is risky is very hard. Second of all, then putting them in more restrictive policy groups, also time consuming. And then doing that at scale makes it nearly impossible for most organizations to have a program successfully doing that. The fact that this risk adaptive solution of Forcepoints does this in an automated monitor and enforcement manner, very beneficial. And customers, analysts, everybody gives us really great feedback on this particular piece.
Great.
So something new and exciting that Forcepoint has done is we've partnered with Getvisibility. And through that partnership, we have a new offering, Forcepoint classification. So that second bullet on the top of classifying your sensitive data is really important. If you go to the next slide, Kevin, Getvisibility allows us to do some user classification, and really helps organizations get more and more serious about that data classification. It is important to allow users to classify their data, but it's also important to check them as they classify their data, so that you can do that enforcement on the DLP side in a very effective, low false positive manner. There are enterprises out there who are not running great classification programs, and they're just running DLP programs, but they do struggle with false positives in those cases. So
I'm just saying one quick interesting thing on this. This was a Forrester quote about zero trust. I was wondering if you could speak to it. How does classification play into zero trust?
So that's a good question. On the zero trust side, it's important, again, to allow your users to have flexibility with the data. But if you approach it from a zero trust side, have policies in place that force them to classify data in a proper way for classification. Mark might talk about this a little bit more, but with most classification tools, they trust the user to classify data right in a proper manner. If they are wrong or being malicious, they can misclassify data. In a zero trust, you have a fail-safe mechanism where you can proactively, programmatically scan the file, know that there's sensitive data in the file based on your policies, allow the user to classify it, and don't allow them to but at a minimum, the software will know if there's PII data, so you have to classify it at least with PII, but you could go to a higher classification. But zero trust is very important in that classification aspect.
Great.
So with Getvisibility, some unique things that we have done through this partnership with Getvisibility is introduced into the Forcepoint platform some AI and ML-based automation that really helps enforce that zero trust. We've integrated that with Forcepoint One and our DLP solutions, but I'll let Mark talk a little bit more about the Getvisibility solution.
Thanks, Jaimen. So Getvisibility, we've built what we consider to be the next generation of classification technology, which addresses a number of the issues or the burdensome tasks on the end user in terms of classifying data. So when you're classifying data, it's really important that it's highly accurate and has a low degree of false positives and false negatives. This is very difficult to do if you're a person trying to classify and understand. there's a large training requirement to get end users to classify and understand what documents are sensitive and non-sensitive. And this is continuously changing, particularly with new regulations or new descriptions internally of what IP is. And you're also at the mercy of employees making mistakes or acting nefariously in terms of maybe trying to take data out. So what we've done with Getvisibility, we're using the latest in terms of artificial intelligence and machine learning to assist the user and to allow the user to control an element of the classification, but where the overall security of the system is monitored by artificial intelligence that looks and knows to a high degree or very high degree of accuracy what that document should be. And this essentially allows you to have high accurate levels of classification. It enables the end user to understand what classification is because the AI provides suggestions and prompts and helps the user understand it, demystifies classification, and it reduces the risk and the burden of the employee classifying. And it does it at scale, and it proactively learns the types of data that your organization has and can be adapted to the different and changing regulations. So essentially using artificial intelligence, highly automated, you're enabling your data to be very accurately classified. You get full visibility as a security practitioner and control of your data. And it allows your DLP and other data protections to be operationalized without creating business disruption. And this is a transformational change in terms of how classification is done. We do that through looking at classification, not only through the eyes of an end user who would be subject to high degrees of error when they're classifying, but we take a mathematical view of that document. We create an anonymized mathematical vector, and we compare that to other documents that we know to be similar in space, whether they be sensitive documents or documents with personally identifiable information or highly regulated information. So when that document is classified by the end user, you can be highly confident that that document is accurately classified. When it enters your DLP or any other data protection tool you have, it's not going to cause business disruption, and you're not going to get your data leaking. And likewise, our system. Sorry, Kevin.
Oh, I'm just wondering, just as you're talking to the particularly the model, I know I've heard you talk in the past about a 50-dimensional model. That's pretty much the stuff that's on the left of the diagram. How does that work? How do the dimensions work?
Yeah, so unlike your traditional classification, which is either done by the user or by using pattern matching or expensive regex patterns to identify documents, what we do is we deconstruct your document irrespective of language, and we create a vector in space, 50-dimensional vector, if you can imagine that, and that's got an area in space. And we've seen hundreds of millions of documents that might have a very similar mathematical vector, and because we know that those vectors are of a type of sensitive document or IP or PII, we can tell with a high degree of accuracy that this document looks exceptionally like that or very like that. And that essentially is how we get to the high degree of accuracy really quickly.
That's great. And then as far as the growing accuracy, what should a customer expect at the start when they deploy, and then over a matter of months or over time, how does that change?
Yeah, the out of the box has a high degree of accuracy. You're talking 95% plus, say, on something like personally identifiable information. But the real power in terms of having artificial intelligence model is you can start to create your own taxonomy or your own types of sensitive documents. And over time, you can train the model to really understand your data. And this is multiple positive impacts, not only in data security, but lots of different areas of your data. So the model will grow and learn as your users are feeding back. And that's the power of having users involved, is you get the opportunity to go beyond your high level classification have multiple very granular views of your data.
That's great. Maybe could you maybe speak to this as far as how it actually works? What is the customer, from their perspective, how do they experience it?
Yeah, so the key with the classification is to take away the risk or the burden or maybe the fear or reluctance that employees will have in terms of classifying data. So you're empowering them to classify the documents, but that's a large overhead and a very large responsibility, particularly when you're dealing with confidential information, and it's prone to mistakes and prone to misinterpretations. So our system is built to sit on top of a document that you may be drafting, or an email or an Excel sheet. That document will be edited or created. And as you're starting to interact with that document, the AI is learning or assessing what that document looks like, whether it's containing IP or PII. And it'll, at the right time, provide suggestions to the user before they save it or send it or delete it. We'll send suggestions as to this is a confidential document or non-confidential document. And the user then can use the suggestions to help them classify, reducing the need for training, reducing the level of inaccurate classifications. But also, and importantly, this is feeding back to your central alerting system. So it'll pick up when someone is editing or changing or misclassifying a really important sensitive document. You'll get oversight of that, and that can lead to improved training, or it can lead to serious incidents being diverted.
Great. Now it says over here on the left, the suggestions you have for classification, and there's a percentage for internal, and then you have compliance and another percentage related to GDPR. So what are they specifically telling us?
So this is telling us that based on what's in this document, our model is 87% confident that it's an internal document, 75% confident that it's got GDPR and PII. And when you're configuring the system, depending on who you're regulated by or what's important to you as an organization, you can decide how you want to classify that document. You can start with 3 basic layers of classification: public, internal, or confidential. Or you can say, I want to look at it from a compliance perspective. And our model is then assessing the content of your document against those different classification labels. And that's what it's doing here, is it's feeding back the degree to which it's confident that this is internal. So if you happen to be working on this document and previously you may have received this to be public and missed the personally identifiable information, this is now telling you that there's internal. So it's assisting you in terms of the classification and taking you away from potentially making an error on how you're dealing with that internal document.
That's great. I wanted to go back to Jaimen again. And as far as this, what Mark has just been explaining to us with Forcepoint classification and this AI ML and all of this, how does this work specifically with respect to Forcepoint's DLP and Forcepoint One integrated DLP? How does this help benefit that solution?
So for customers who are doing a holistic data security program, classification is an important piece, and there is integration points with DLP, Forcepoint DLP, and then Forcepoint One DLP as well. Specifically, you take the power of that AI ML that Mark was talking about, understand what's in the document, have the user classify that document. That classification then actually applies a tag or a label to the document. So as the document is moving, that's where DLP really jumps in. It's data in motion, it's trying to be egressed, and that at that egress point, that label is read and a policy is applied based on that label. And the policy comes from the DLP configuration. Forcepoint DLP and Forcepoint One are just different channels of egress. So Forcepoint One really targets the SSE market, which is CASB, ZTNA, SWIG. Those are 3 egress channels. Forcepoint DLP covers other channels like the web channel, email channel, endpoint, if you're trying to copy to USB. All of those are just egress points. And like I was saying, at the time of egress, those labels are read and policy enforced. And so it's a very important part of the overall data protection program that you have upfront identified and classified that data.
Now, how important do you think it is? This is kind of stepping back in terms of classification, but there are many people, they don't have classification programs running at all, and they're doing DLP. How important is it that there's some type of classification, and how does this one maybe it's a little bit better in terms of classification for DLP?
Yeah, so classification helps you in a couple of different ways. Without it, you can still inspect a file in real time. What will happen though is your false positives will be higher, and each incident that's created costs you money. An analyst has to get in and triage an incident, and you could probably put a dollar amount to that to identify a true positive and a false positive. The more upfront work you can do to really understand that data, like Mark was saying earlier, AI, ML, it can get smarter and smarter over time, making your classification accurate. Once the classification is very accurate, your false positives drop precipitously.
Now I'd like to shift over, if we could look at just some specific examples maybe that you all know of different types of organizations and how Forcepoint classification and DLP can help a company in terms of protecting their data. Jaimen or Mark, if you have any ideas or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've one at the that comes to mind very easily. We're dealing with a large food ingredients company who was very concerned about staff who were leaving, taking valuable IP to competitors. They essentially manufacture food ingredients and food for third parties, and they hold a lot of IP. The difficulty they had is they were not able to tell the difference between a recipe with a set of ingredients and a purchase order with a set of ingredients. So when they put restrictions around anything that contained those ingredients, they were stopping the purchase orders from being sent and essentially making it very difficult to operationalize. Because we use AI and we look at a document from a mathematical perspective, we were very easily able to tell the difference between the structure of a recipe and the structure of purchase order. We were able to accurately tag the ingredients with the recipe. And because we were classifying that as IP and highly confidential, that was easily blocked then by the DLP, and all of a sudden there was no fear about the levers and the data was able to be operationalized. We also see a lot of cases with emails. So there's a lot of accidents happen in terms of sending an email or, and attaching the wrong attachment. And very recently, we were working with an organization and through the case of a POC, they were sending an email and that employee had attached a very valuable piece of IP, highly regulated IP, to that email and was sending it out. And immediately our system picked up that it was a very valuable piece of confidential information, and it blocked the email from being sent. And it did so very accurately. And this would not have been picked up through the manual classification that they had been doing previously. So that was another case where our system, using the AI to double check or to verify what the user is doing, leaves for very accurate classification and therefore very accurate protection as well.
That's great. We also noticed, as far as with our data loss prevention solutions, the email is such a important channel to keep protected. There's so much data gets through email, and so it's having that, what you just described, Mark, sounds really exciting as far as a way to be able to protect that channel. Jaimen, do you have any thoughts as far as any other organizations or use cases where you've seen this?
Yeah, just to finish off on email, most of the customers that I talk to as well agree that email is their biggest egress vector, and spend a lot of time protecting that particular egress channel. But to answer your question, Kevin, as I think about this, one of our larger customers, a big pharmaceutical company, also has a problem of leavers. I think post-COVID, we have had a lot of opportunity for employees to switch jobs, get a higher salary. These are mostly scientists and research and development type of individuals, where they've been working with a company for many, many years, have developed a lot of their own, they believe it's their own intellectual property, I should say, and they feel like they should take that with them as they move to the next role at a new company. This data is the company's data, and it should not go with the employees. So classification is very important. That data, as it's created, needs to have a classification on it. Most solutions like Bolden James, Microsoft solutions, allow for misclassification or just single layer classification, where it can be misclassified or not classified with enough detail to allow a proper enforcement. But as individuals are leaving organizations, it's important, very important, that data have a proper classification label on it, to prevent those leavers from taking that data with them as they leave the organization. Another one that comes to mind is a malicious insider. I had a customer a few years ago, large chemical manufacturing company, lots and lots of intellectual property. They had a malicious insider that was scanning the network, mapping the network, looking for something very specific, a particular patented IP. And when he found it, and it was not classified at this particular account. This was before this customer was doing much of the upfront classification data governance they should have been doing. So in this case, the action was seen that the data was taken, but it was not protected. This company is now paying the consequences and have a much better data governance and classification in place so that this doesn't happen again. But it's incidents like this that sometimes cause companies to pull up their heads and say, what are we missing? What can we be doing better? And those 4 steps that I had mentioned at the beginning of the presentation around discover and classify, monitor, protect, it's more than just the protect. It's that upfront work that would prevent situations like this.
That's great. Thanks, Jaimen. Thank you again. Actually, we've come to the end of our webinar. Thanks, Jaimen and Mark, for some really interesting, thought-provoking points about classification. Also, just this introduction into Forcepoint classification, how it makes use of AI and ML to improve accuracy, and really being this kind of next generation for classification and helping DLP become more automated. We do have in the box, you can see there's a free brochure you can download. You can click there. There's also a link for a live demo if you're interested in getting a live demo for this. We'd be happy to provide that for you. There also are 4 videos. They're brief videos that talk specifically about how you can implement Forcepoint classification in our Forcepoint DLP, as well as in Forcepoint 1 integrated DLP. And then also just exactly how it works within the user experience within both of these environments. So you can see that in those videos as well. Again, I want to thank Jaimen Hoopes and Mark Brosnan for participating in this webinar. We thank you for watching it, and we look forward to hopefully working with you in the future.